The Australian customs ship Triton is at sea somewhere with 153 asylum seekers in custody on board. But we don't know where it is or where it's headed. These are the known unknowns of Australia's asylum seeker policy that's now being tested in the High Court. The adults and more than 30 children on board are believed to be Sri Lankan Tamils who were intercepted by the Australian authorities more than 10 days ago. Their treatment, as much as is known, has been criticised by human rights lawyers and questioned by the United Nations. Some are even calling this Tony Abbott's Tampa moment, a comparison with the standoff at sea between the Howard government and a Norwegian vessel carrying Afghan refugees in 2001. Madeline Morris reports.
From these waters in southern India, a boatload of 153 people left in search of a better life in Australia. They're believed to be Sri Lankan Tamils. Some come from these refugee camps in India, others possibly from Sri Lanka itself.
We didn't get any help from anywhere, and the wind also increased in high speed, and huge waves are in the ocean. The children and infants also inside the boat.
This call to the ABC was one of the last made from the boat before it went silent, intercepted by Australian authorities outside our waters 11 days ago.
We have managed to find out yesterday, that's the first time at the High Court, that these refugees are alive and in the hands of the Australian Navy. That's the only information we have about the whereabouts of these refugees.
Today, the Prime Minister was refusing to say where they are.
I won't talk about on-the-water operations. That's to give aid and comfort to the people smugglers, and that's not something that I'm going to do.
Can you at the least this morning, though, confirm that they will not be going back to Sri Lanka? They won't be sent back to Sri Lanka?
I will confirm today, as I always will, that we will operate in accordance with our legal obligations and we will operate in accordance with safety at sea.
Anxiously waiting for any news is this man.
We have had no contact with them and I'm so stressed over what's happened to them. There's no way they can return home.
Suresh, as he's asked to be called, spoke to 7:30 on condition of anonymity because he's living illegally in Europe and still fears persecution in Sri Lanka. His wife, parents-in-law and much of her extended family were on the boat, along with his 3-year-old daughter.
Our daughter's name is Febrina. She likes to dress as a fairy. Her mother asked me to buy this dress for her. I haven't seen her since she was born.
Suresh said his family had to flee Sri Lanka because he was a known sympathiser of the defeated Tamil Tiger rebel group.
We can't live in our own homeland. We can't live in India. I'm separated from them. I can't go and visit them, and it's because of that my wife decided to take this perilous journey. I hope the Australian government will safeguard my family, because if they are returned to Sri Lanka, my whole family would be wiped out.
But yesterday in the High Court, any hopes of resettlement in Australia were quashed. The government revealed the boat had been picked up in waters called the Contiguous Zone, where the Migration Act doesn't apply. That means it's under no obligation to hear asylum claims of those on board.
It's a zone that is outside of Australian territorial waters, but in which Australia can exercise power to prevent the entry of vessels. The Australian government's effectively arguing we can exercise power in that zone, but we don't have responsibility for the exercise of that power.
Human rights lawyer Hugh de Kretser says this case is in uncharted legal waters.
It's very difficult to predict what will happen. The Australian government wants to return them to Sri Lanka. Other options are to bring them to the Australian mainland to properly process and fairly and openly process their refugee claims. Of course, the Australian government may be looking at options to process those claims on Christmas Island, on the Australian mainland, on the Manus Island or on Nauru. We just don't know. It's extraordinary what's happening. It's taking the stop the boats mantra to a whole new level.
What's going on with this boat, in some ways, is completely ridiculous. The government are jumping around and trying to find a good outcome that'll suit their purposes. And in the meantime, you have people sitting on a boat in the middle of the Indian Ocean waiting for some sort of result.
Greg Lake was, until 18 months ago, the Director of Offshore Processing and Transfers for the Immigration Department.
If this is a safety issue and the people on board are genuinely in need of safety, then they should be taken to Christmas Island and provided with support because they're at risk. If they're not in need of safety and this is an issue of some sort of threat to Australia's borders, then the government should implement their policy on how we deal with that, which is to take them to Christmas Island, process them and transfer them to an offshore processing place. It makes no sense that we're sitting here at sea waiting for some sort of third option.
Today, Immigration Minister Scott Morrison rubbed shoulders with the Sri Lankan military at a pre-planned event. Australia is giving the country 2 patrol boats to help combat people smuggling operations. But the minister kept mum on the other boat that's causing his government such a headache.
That's speculating on matters that are still before the courts in Australia, but the Australian government's policies on these matters have been very, very clear from the outset of our operations, and those operations have been very successful, and it is our intent that they will continue to be successful.
It'll be another 20 days before the High Court hears the case again. Unconfirmed reports are now emerging that the boat may have taken on passengers from both India and Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan High Commission has said it won't take back any Tamils who left from India, but it hasn't made any comment on whether it would accept those who left from Sri Lanka itself. In the meantime, lawyers for the 153 asylum seekers have told 7:30 they're still trying to get access to their clients. Last night, the United Nations weighed in.
We understand that since their interception more than a week ago, the individuals on this vessel have not been able to make contact with family members or refugee organizations. We hope the matter will be subject to a full judicial review in light of Australia's obligations under international law.
While the legal limbo is resolved, for the 153 people on board and their families, all they can do is wait.
I'm living with the hope of seeing them. I've not seen them for over 3 years, and without them, my life is meaningless.
Madeline Morris reporting.